I was an atheist. I came from a long line of atheists. And I had moved to New York City after I graduated from college because my God was basically coolness. I just wanted to feel cool. This is me at 22. And so I was going to nightclubs all the time. And on this particular night, I called a friend who had been a Coke dealer while we were at college and asked him to come down to New York City. And he did. And he brought cocaine, and we did a bunch of cocaine in the cab going to the nightclub. And we did more when we got to the nightclub. And I was dancing, and I was almost feeling cool. I was almost feeling that I was good enough, that I was pretty enough, that my dancing was good enough. I was just almost feeling that everything was good enough. And we ran out of cocaine and just started to go back to regular life, which I was not a friend of. And so we started asking around if we could buy cocaine at the club. And somebody pointed out a kind of scrawny looking guy, nervous guy. And he said, yeah, good stuff. And we took the white powder, we put it on our gums, and it numbed our gums. So we assumed it was cocaine, not baby powder or whatever. And we paid him, and then we started snorting it, but it did nothing. People asked me, were you high? No, it was doing nothing. And my date, he said, we've been had. This is worthless. And he threw down his bill that he was snorting with. And my thought, like any good alcoholic addict, was, well, maybe it's just really lousy Coke. And so if I do the whole pile, maybe I'll just get a little bit high. So I, excuse me, I snorted the whole pile. And it was not cocaine, it was lidocaine. And it had numbed our gums because lidocaine is an anesthetic. And later, after I got sober, I made friends in Alcoholics Anonymous who had been Coke dealers in the 80s. And they said, we used to cut the cocaine with lidocaine. But it sounds like you were sold pure lidocaine, which is poison. So if you ingest it systemically, they use it topically because it makes you numb. But if you ingest it, it stops the nerves that run your heart, the nerves that control your breathing, and they all basically go numb and paralyzed too. So you die. And so I didn't know I was dying because, again, I had thought that it was cocaine. So I began to notice my vision turning into tunnel vision. All of this was kind of blindness around here, and I could see only a smaller and smaller area. But instead of being scared, I just thought I was cool. And I just thought, oh, what a great side effect this is of cocaine. So I went in the restroom, and when I was in the restroom, it began to seem like it was getting darker and darker. What was happening is my heart was beating slower and slower, and I wasn't breathing enough. But when I even did start to breathe, with my heart rate so depressed, there was no circulation happening for my brain. So I was getting oxygen starved. I came out of the bathroom, grabbed my date, and I said, there's no air in here. There's no air in here, meaning in the nightclub. It was a basement floor of a nightclub. And in my mind, people had just breathed up all the air. So I was a symptom of oxygen deprivation is people get angry sometimes, and just before they faint or whatever. And so I was angry, and he took me to the bar, and the bartender said, just calm down, and gave me a glass of ice water, which I did not want. I was breathing as hard as I could, and I was angry that other people weren't noticing there was no air. So he gave me the ice water. I took a sip, and at that moment on this side, I had a grand mal seizure, and it ended in a cardiac arrest. And I was unresponsive to CPR for, they estimate, over 3 minutes. There's nobody timing, but that's the best. That was, the bartender was doing the CPR on me. But on my side, I just rocketed out of my body. And the instant I shot up out of my body, I almost felt like I'd gotten a Popeye punch, and I felt like I had maybe collapsed and hit my chin on the bar, because it seemed to hit me here and shoot me up in the air, like if you were shot out of a cannon in a movie. And I shot up in the air, and I had a sense, not so much visual, but a sense of Manhattan and the city lights and all of that stuff sort of receding below me to the left. And I just felt like, oh, thank goodness that's over with. That whole business of being Louisa. That was not going well. And I really felt like all that silliness. I'm so glad all that silliness is over with. And I shot straight up in the air, and it was beautiful blue sky. And under me was the ocean, just going in all directions. Beautiful blue, just absolutely pristine, no pollution whatsoever. And so I just got this funny notion that I could do a back bend and then do a dive. So as I was slowing, I did a back bend and I arched over, and it felt really good, and I did a dive. And as I was heading for the ocean, it was very far below, and I thought, isn't the water like concrete if you hit it going very fast? But I didn't have any fear. I just thought, well, we'll see. And so I dove into the ocean, and I went way down deep, and I'm like, that worked out. But then I was way down there, and I could see the bubbles rising around me, and it was beautiful. And I could see the surface, dappling surface with the light, but it was very far away. And so I also had a thought, can I get there? Can I reach that? And then next thing I know, I'm surfacing. And so I just think, well, that worked out. And then I saw the shore, and I wanted to be there. I swam maybe 1-2 strokes, and then I'm wading out on the beach. And I had no question of like, where did that time go? Why did it happen so easily? I now know that when we're on the other side, nothing is physical. It's all just representations and symbols of whatever realms I was passing through. So on the beach, I looked down the beach, and I saw up on a mesa, like we call them a sea stack here, where the ocean has eroded away everything but a column of earth. And on top of that was a very old, weather-worn house. It was kind of pale blue, and the shingles were, not all on it. It was old. And I just knew that house had to do with me, and I was very excited to see it. And so I was like, I gotta go there. But instead of finding myself at the house the way everything had been working, this time I just found myself at the bottom of the mesa. And I realized I was going to have to climb it. And it was covered with this filthy, disgusting, putrid slime. And I was revolted by it. And that was my slime. That was the Louisa who wants to be cool, the Louisa who wants to be better than other people. That was my slime. I didn't think that at the time, didn't know that. I just thought I can get past this. So I just started climbing, and then the next thing I knew, I made it to the door sill, but not the way I expected. I was only this high above the door sill, at the bottom of the door, and I didn't have any body. I was just a subjective awareness, like if there was a camera moving that high off the ground. And so as soon as I crossed that threshold, I knew intuitively that this was the house of my ancestors, and that all of my ancestors had passed this same threshold. And I began to feel my ancestors around me. What I was seeing was the old wood of the floor, very, very close up. And I could see how it was kind of grooved and almost like powdery. And I knew that's because so many of us have come this way, that's why it looks like that. And I could sense a whole lot of my ancestors, people I didn't know, but the one that I felt the most strongly was my father's father, who had died before I was born. And I could just feel he was so happy that I was crossing, and so happy that he was going to get to be with me, in the spirit on the other side. And I didn't care at all about him as my cool self back on earth. I only knew him from, my mom didn't like my dad's family, so his pictures were all in his closet, my poor dad. And so the only way I knew this grandfather was the black and white photo in my dad's closet. And yet on on the other side, I was so excited to meet him. I was so excited. And I felt honored. Like now it's my turn to do these things. And it's as if, you're being crowned or something. It was this sense of just honor to be there. But there was supposed to be a big armchair in the middle of the room where all my ancestors had sat and admired the view, and it wasn't there. And I had this sense of being like gypped or shortchanged. I was like, where's the chair? I get to sit in the chair now, and it's not there. And I also, was only this high. So they like to sit in the chair and watch the beautiful view out front. And so I'm like, I want to see it. And as soon as I thought, I want to see it, something grabbed me by the sternum and pulled me across the floor. And I had a sense of, whoa, where's this motion coming from? I'm not doing this. And it brought me up over the windowsill and then out over the ocean, and we were flying over the ocean. I thought I was alone. I just thought I was doing this. I didn't know how it was happening, but I was zooming toward the sunset. So the sun was very low in the sky. It was lighting up the whole sky with all these amazingly beautiful colors. And there was a path that came toward me reflecting off the ocean. And I just zoomed over that. And I was filled with this exhilaration of travel. What was actually happening was my vibration was rising. I didn't know that, of course, but I know that now. And I had a skeptical thought, an old thought. I thought, this is just a little too perfect. Beautiful sunset, flying over the ocean, people dream. And I just thought, is this real? And as soon as I thought, is this real? Something answered me, and it was just like instantaneous, chung, and it just said, more real than anything back there. And I was very surprised to be answered. And the voice was very kind of like resonant in my bones or something, and just powerful. That's the only way I can put it. But I also knew that it was right. And I remember thinking it is more real than anything back there. Because when you think about it, what's back here is really just a bunch of neurons and stuff going on inside our skull, sort of like a theater, right? And this was direct energy happening with me in it. So it was more real than what we perceive inside our brains. So it's getting closer and closer to the sun. And I again had one of those thoughts, like, aren't I going to vaporize? And again, no fear, because the only role of fear is to keep us in our bodies. So as soon as you leave your body, you don't have fear. And I got closer and closer. I began to see some of the patterns on the sun. And then I went through this filament and I was in the light. And all the NDEers talk about the light. This was 1982. I had never heard of any of this stuff. And the light was all around me and so warm. And my thoughts were, it's warm in me. It's not just warm on the outside, it's warm in me. And I tried to describe it sort of like if you lie on the beach in the sun and it's really comfortable warmth, but it's all through, and it's all through your consciousness too, this warmth of the sun. And then I began to realize it was love. And I became aware that I was being held like an infant in the arms of a being. Couldn't see, all I could see was the light. And it was pouring love into me and saying, you are so loved, you are so precious. And it wasn't like they were, we do this for everybody. It was this being knew me from my inception and loved me for everything I was, vanity and all of my faults, everything, just loved me. And I just wanted to stay there forever because I was in perfect bliss. And then, apropos of nothing, the being just says, you can't stay, you're not done. And boom, it went black. And I was not having it. I was just not having it. And I got really, really angry and threw a fit. People will say, how could you do that? How could you go from bliss to anger? Because I was getting put back in my body. And the body is surrounded by a sort of force field of anger and fear and all the things that keep us cut off from God. right? So that we can function without constantly sensing spirits all the time, although now I do. But as people, many of us, it's not true for everybody, but many of us, as we pass back through that energetic, I just like to call it sort of anti-God, sort of like, or God phobic or something, you feel rage. And so I felt rage, but I felt one more thing, one more message from the parent figure, from the being, and it just said, you know, case closed, sweetheart. And I knew it was hopeless. And so I was in the darkness. I began to see these little stick figures in the darkness that looked like they were chalk drawings on a blackboard, and they were doing all these little antics and gymnastics and playing on a child's swing set and teeter-totter. And I thought, well, I'll just watch these guys until I can go back to the light. And it's not nearly as good, but it's a toy that the parent has given me. And then one of the little stick figures got closer and closer, and instead of being a chalk outline of a face, it filled in like a dinner plate. And I was trying to see around him because I wanted to see the others. And then I realized he's not just saying kind of nursery rhymes or whatever the others were all saying. He was saying, how many fingers? What is your name? And all of a sudden I remembered the world. And I thought, he thinks that we're separate, which is so dumb. And he wants me to do this thing where you're with your mouth, like, and it's a code, and you pass back and forth the code. And I just thought, I'm so done with that. I also felt like my mouth was way down below where I was, because I was kind of newly back in my brain, so my mouth seemed very far below. But I managed to say 2 and then my name. And they got me up and took me outside. And it was outside that the bartender came to talk to first to my friend. And my friend had said, you know, he was saying it went on for a long time. And my friend had said, I thought she was just gone and I wanted you to cover her up because I had turned gray and you know, just looked like a corpse. And he thought it was hopeless. It's a long time for CPR not to work, if you think about it. And then he came over to talk to me, and I put together that I had been dead and that he had done mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. And I am so embarrassed of this now, but 22-year-old me thought, oh my God, he's got to be 30 and he's like balding. That's so embarrassing. And so I don't know that I even thanked him. I think if I had already lit a cigarette, I know that. And so if I thanked him, it was just like, yeah, thanks, man. You know, that's who saved my life. And that was my response. So I have to live with that. I have tried to reach him. I have not been able. I'm always hoping that one of these days he's going to see this video. We worked at the Peppermint Lounge in 1982. If you resuscitated an ungrateful, bratty 22-year-old, that was me. And I want to thank you. So this is what sort of distinguishes me. Most NDEers, you know, the next days, they know what happened was more real than here. But what if you're an alcoholic? What if you've never heard of a near-death experience and the only thing you have to correlate with this heavenly world is religion? And I despised religion. I despised Christianity, really everything except Buddhism. And I didn't really know any others. I just knew I wanted to keep drinking. I knew I wanted to keep trying to be a bad girl and wear my mini skirts and smoke my cigarettes and go to parties and do all those things. And that if I acknowledged that this was real, I would have to stop all that. And I just couldn't imagine life without it. And the pull of addiction is even stronger, I think, than the pull of God was for me at that time. And so I just decided this was a brain thing. I decided maybe just before your consciousness goes out completely, there's some kind of, you know, I didn't think explosion of activity. That's what people think now. What I thought was if it gets reduced down to the most basic thing, that's going to be love. And the most basic perception is light. And so I was just in love and light because they are kind of the core of one's consciousness. But it was all in my brain. And I just wanted that to be true. And so I wanted to just go back to being what I was. But Over the years, I had many, many after effects. They are all told in my book, which is called Die Hard Atheist, from NDE denier to full-on woo-woo, because I am a full-on woo-woo now. And it was paranormal events, and it was at the 9th one that I finally came out to myself as this is real and I can never pretend again that it's not. But it's so hard for us because materialism is just baked in. It's baked into the Indian culture, I think, and it's definitely baked into the American culture. And scientists are always trying to explain away near-death experiences instead of examine them and find out what it is. And it's very aggravating, but that's what I was too. So I can't really blame them because I didn't want. So the first thing that happened was seeing a ghost, and the next one was knowing my nephew was gonna die. And I can tell you whichever ones you want, Amandeep. It was 1982 when I had the experience, and it wasn't until 1987 that I saw the ghost. And the ghost was an experience of being on a beach in a storm at 7 a.m. when no one else was there. I was there to be dramatic about a love that wasn't working out for me. And I saw this fisherman guy wearing old Macintosh rain gear way down the beach, but he was coming out of like what was just a swampy area. There were no houses there or anything. So I made up my mind that when we crossed paths, because I was going this way and he was going toward the water from the dunes, when we crossed paths, I was going to ask him, where did you get that really cool old rain gear? But as I got closer and closer, I could see he was really upset. He was staring at the horizon, but there was no horizon. So I'm like, what is he staring at? There's nothing but clouds. You can't even see the horizon. He's looking as if he can see it. And then I began to, he doesn't want to talk about his rain gear. I thought he's way too upset. And I crossed behind him, but as I was just about to cross behind him, I said, how's it going? And I saw he had bloodshot eyes. He drank a lot. He had broken capillaries in his skin, and his eye moved just a little bit. And then I crossed behind him, and I went about 10 steps, and I thought, what a jerk. Here we are out in a storm on the beach. We're the only two people, and he can't even say hi back. So I turned around and he was gone. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out where he'd gone, a lot of different theories about how he had gotten away so fast because he was very old. And I was watching the water to see if his hat would surface. And then I thought, I know, I'll just follow his tracks. So I went back, and mine were the only tracks on the beach. And I was still like a materialist. I was still like, that can't be. That just can't be. It would be like, if I held up this teacup and then let go of it, and it just stayed in the air. Like, how it can't be. People told me when I got back to the cabin where I was staying that this was Gloucester, and that there are thousands of seamen, whatever you call them, sailors, lost their lives in storms out there. And he cared very much about someone who was on one of those ships, and he's stuck in this loop of looking for him. Now I know that, but at the time I just was angry. And then the next one was knowing that my nephew, who wasn't born yet, was going to die, and I didn't know how. I just knew the grief my brother was going to experience when his son died, but I couldn't tell them because I didn't know what was going to happen. And it turned out that he had, instead of an umbilical cord, all his blood vessels were fanned out over the amniotic sac, so when it tore, he bled to death. But it was a terrible feeling because I wanted to just feel mourning. I wanted to just feel sadness. And yet I was like, I knew from the moment I heard of this pregnancy, I knew. I didn't just have a paranoid feeling. I knew it. It was a very heavy feeling of my brother's grief. Not worry about the child, heaviness of his grief. And so I didn't know what to do with that. And I just swore I would take that to my grave. I would never share it with anyone because what a shameful thing. And then comes the part that I have told many times about when I drove home extremely drunk, I was 35 and I was still going to what are called kegers, like the kids have a party with a keg, and I would just get in line for the keg as soon as I had my cup full so that I could go and fill it again. Didn't have a plan for how to live, and I was getting to be pathetic. And so I drove home so drunk, and I came to a place where the road narrowed to go over a bridge that crossed over some railroad tracks. And I saw the reflector signs. There were like so many that they like went across the whole field of my vision. I had no idea which was real, but at that point I didn't really want to live anymore. I just thought it would be better for everybody if I crashed my car and died. So I just zoomed through at 80 miles an hour. And I got home and I got out of my car. I lived in a log cabin in the woods at that time. And my thought was, I am such a badass when I drive drunk. I'm so cool. And and the voice, the same voice that had said more real than anything back there, it just shot through me like a lightning bolt. It just was so powerful. And he had to yell because I was so full of ego. I was so full of self-deception, all of these things. So he said two things to me. He said, this is the last time I can help you, and you do know right from wrong. And those memories were crystal clear. I was blackout drunk, but the two things I remember are the moment that I crossed the bridge, because he was doing it, not me, right? And the moment that he filled me with those messages. And when I got up the next morning, I'd made a terrible mess in the kitchen, no memory of that. And yet this very crystal clear memory of having glanced up at the stars and this message coming, shooting through me. So I tried to keep drinking, and it just, try drinking alcoholically and abusing alcohol when somebody keeps saying, you do know right from wrong, and think about all the close shaves you've had and that somebody saved you. And I didn't really connect it. It sounds so stupid that I didn't connect it with my near-death experience, except way deep down at the soul level, I kind of knew it was the same guy. But my conscious, busy, silly brain was just like, that was really weird. Like that's, I didn't know what to do with it. Now all the pieces fit. But at the time I was just anyway, I got sober a month later, and I haven't had a drink since, and it's been 30 years. So he changed my life. The other thing that changed my life was that I began to pray, because he led me through a crush on someone and I ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I began praying. And once I began praying, it became much easier for that voice to reach me, because I was opening my channel even just a little bit. Prayer is like that. If you can ask for help, you will get guidance. Maybe not what you wanted, but some form of guidance. So after that, the paranormal things started coming much more quickly. When my sister was dying, the voice came to me in the hospital and said, she's afraid to cross. You need to help her. Tell her about the light. And it just kept saying I didn't know all of the stuff about crossing, and I didn't really understand what to make of, you need to help her. I didn't know any of what that was, but I could definitely hear him saying, you need to tell her about the light. You need to describe the light. You need to tell her about the light. And we had been told she was going to live another 2 weeks. And I didn't want to believe him. Plus, I didn't think she'd hear me because she didn't appear to be conscious. But they can light up different memories. And so he lit up a memory of a time I'd had a conversation with my sister when she said, people think I'm out of it when I'm on the morphine, but I hear every word. I can't show it, but I hear every word. Because there's been not only the breast cancer, but the cancer was in her bones, and they had removed her hip, and it was all kinds of things that they had her on the morphine for. But then she had also said to my sister, my sister told me this, that she had said dying of breast cancer at 41 is the biggest disc God can give you. So this shell around us of fear and anger, hers was resentment of the time she was bullied, the time she was left out, the times people mocked her. She had a hard time because she was very intellectual growing up, and she'd been bullied as a kid, and she felt like God was bullying her. So she couldn't cross. Anyway, I began to sense the light coming in through the hospital window, and it was when my eyes were closed, and this is in the night, and I sensed that it went along the floor, and then it was kind of making a design like a galaxy over my sister. And I knew at some level it was our ancestors, and they wanted to take her. And I'd look and open my eyes, and I'd just say, don't be silly. Come back to real life. This is just a hospital room, and she's going to live 2 weeks. But then he'd be there. Tell her about the light. Tell her about. So finally, I couldn't stand it, and I said, okay, I'll do it. And this was actually a big turning point for me, because I went against my will and my interpretation of what was happening, and I went with his. So I knelt by her, and I told her she'd lived a wonderful life, and that, God was really pleased with her. She was Christian, so I said Jesus for everything. And then I said, you'll be in the light, and Jesus will be with you, and you'll be in his arms, and he loves you, and you can go. You should, I love you. And my brother was in there, and my brother's looking at me like I'm nuts, right? And I sat back down, and then 20 minutes later, she hemorrhaged, and she died. And I freaked out. I forgot all about the voice. I forgot all about the light. And I just ran around the hospital. It's all closed down. It's 5 a.m. And I'm saying, help us, help us, help us. And this doctor finally came and put a stethoscope on my sister and said, her heart is still beating right now, but it'll stop when it runs out of oxygen. And I just wanted to grab that little doctor and just throttle her. I was just like, save my sister. I knew it was hopeless. I knew she had incurable cancer, but I wasn't rational. And so at the height of this rage, I felt filled with love. And it was my sister's love. And anyone you love and you know really well, their love has a certain flavor. Their love has a certain tone, like music, or you just know what that person's love feels like. And I could feel it was my sister. All my anger was gone. And I felt filled with the light. And I wondered to myself, like, is the light in my cells? Because it seems to be all through my body, this warm, beautiful love of my sister. And then she told me, this is important. My youngest son, her youngest son was 2, no one is going to tell him what happened, and I need you to go to him, and I will tell you what to say. And so we went back to her house. Everybody's crying and keening and carrying on, and I find my little nephew, 2 years old. He's under the dining room table by himself, and he's just got a toy, and he's like bending it back and forth. And so I sat down under the table with him, and my sister told me what to say. I said, your mama loves you so much, and all she wanted was to stay here and be your mama. But her body didn't work anymore, and so she had to go to heaven. But she will always love you from there. And then I said, do you understand, Damien? And he said, and I said, can I hug you? And he said, 2 years old, right? And he is the coolest guy now. He is so cool. He's 30 some years old, and he is religious like his mother. He's also Christian, but he's the one who left. My parents just drilled it into us. You got to be the best at everything. You got to compete and beat everyone. And that's what had killed my sister, because she was just going after prize and giving papers at Oxford and teaching at Harvard and trying to raise kids and not sleeping so she could do all these things. That's why she got this terrible cancer. And he was going down the same path. He was really good at playing viola. He was really good at physics. He was supposed to go to Yale. He was supposed to go to Juilliard, and he just said, you know what, I love acting. I'm going to start my own acting troupe. And he just stopped. And he's an actor now, and with a little theater group, and they do spiritual stuff. So he is we climbed a 10,000-foot peak last summer together, he and I, and he has no memory of what I told him that day, but he says he believes in his heart it made a difference in his life. So today, I mean, I hear from my angel all the time. I live in my house because my angel told me to move from Seattle, and he made it happen. I also had a boyfriend who I loved very much, who was also an alcoholic, and I had to leave him because he relapsed. And once he relapsed and started drinking again, he started cheating on me and doing all these things. But I got a call from his sisters one after COVID, after the pandemic, said he's retired now from work, and he retired at 58, I think, and he's just so thin and he's shaking so bad, and he's gonna die. And so I called him after many years of not speaking to him, and I said, sweetheart, you're dying. And man, I know that he was crying. It was a lot of silence because he used to put his thumb over the mic of his phone when he needed to cry. And when his voice came back, I could hear it. And he said, well, everybody has to die. And I said, but to die before you're 60 is a waste of life. Anyway, we got him into treatment. I got to see him in treatment. I saw he had these slippers that I'd given him. He was wearing them, and it was just good to see him. But then he relapsed again. And the last text he sent me was, I can't find a higher power. I can't find a God or a sufficient substitute. And he said, can we talk on the phone? And I said, I'm in an AA meeting, which I was. And then it was, I think 2 days later, he hemorrhaged internally from too much alcohol, and he fainted and then just bled to death. And so it's very sad, but he's come to me more than anybody else. He comes to me all the time. So he came to me one time when I was running, and he used a Gloria Gaynor song that goes, I will survive. And he said, I survived death. That's what he gave me. And he let me know about how utterly baffled he was to be outside his body and seeing all this blood and not knowing how it happened. He still didn't know, even then, how it had happened. And this was like a month after it happened. And so it was, maybe time is not exact when you're on the other side. I'm gathering it's like throwing a dart at a moving target, you know? And so I told him in my mind what he died from. And then he played me another song. It's Cher, If I Could Turn Back Time. And it's basically about saying, I wish I hadn't done the things I did. And then he played another song that asked me if he could come to me in my dreams. But when I took his ashes to the top of the mountain and scattered them, I was coming down the mountain and I got out my cell phone and it was all pink and blue. And I'm like, what happened to my cell phone? So he in electronics in his life. He worked for Boeing and he went all around the world fixing the planes that the local teams couldn't fix. And so I restarted my phone and I was driving home on this highway, and all of a sudden the navigation system says, at the next roundabout, take a left. And I thought, what? I'm heading for Seattle. I don't want to take a left. I'm late for my appointment. And I thought, well, there must be some traffic accident up ahead. There must be something. So I took a left. And then I realized this is his town where he lived his life. And the streets all say 25 miles an hour. So I know it wasn't Google Maps that sent me there. And I look at what Google Maps wants me to do, and it wants me to drive all the way to the lake and then drive along the lake shore. So then I know it's him. I said, sweetheart, I am not going to take a beautiful driver on the lake. I have to appointment, a medical appointment. I have to be at 4. I'm going to be late. So I start trying to find my way back to the highway, and he made on your navigation, there's a little arrow that means you. And he would make it jump over here and jump over there and jump down here. And he just made it jump all over the place. And so the voice thing is going, take a U-turn at, when you turn left at, and it was just going again. It couldn't keep up with, he would move it every 10 seconds. And so then I said, honey, I'm not going to be able to find the highway again. And then I felt him very clearly in his voice and his way. Again, that sense of his love. He said, you don't need that thing. And then here's the capper, is that I found my way back to the highway. I had to drive home. I took a quick shower, drove to the hospital where I had my appointment. All green lights. Parking space right in front of the place. And I got there and I was there at 4 o'clock on the dot. So they can do things. They can help when they want to help. They can do things for us. Our ancestors, our loved ones, all these people on the other side are there, and they're loving. My dad had been forced to be Catholic when he was growing up in a small town in Iron Mountain, Michigan, where all you did was go down in the mines and work, or work at the sawmill. And he was an altar boy in the church, and there was a priest who liked to kiss the boys, and my father hated it. And then in 1940, he got a full scholarship to Harvard. And it was the first round of he was a reject at Harvard because his accent was wrong, and he was a country bumpkin at Harvard, but he just was like, I am leaving all of that Catholicism and religion behind. It's all about science. It's all about utilitarianism and different philosophies that he loved. So starting from when I was very young, he taught me that God was just something people made up when they couldn't explain natural phenomenon or when they were afraid of dying. And it was just like the tooth fairy or something. It just was not a real thing. Mom, she said she was agnostic, and she used to make us study art history and look at like paintings around Christmas time. We'd have to look at all these pictures of the nativity and, Jesus and yada. We had to learn all of that. But she didn't act like she was. I don't want to speak ill of her because she had a hard time, but she's the one that I got all of the look good, beat other people, be better than other people. So if I came home with an A-, my father would say, what happened here? And that's how it was. And the love was very conditional. So in any case, I just thought that religion, spirituality, spiritualism was ridiculous. I would never have thought I'd end up being the person I am today. I didn't tell anyone for a long time because, as I told you, I put it behind me. So when I would tell it, I would only tell it if I was very drunk and wanted to have a good story. And I always had a sense when I did that I was, profaning something sacred. I would feel guilty, but I wanted attention. So I would tell this story. And I tried after my sister died and I came back to her home, and my other sister opened the door, and I wished I could tell her about what had happened with the voice and the light and all of those things, but I just said I was brave. And she looked at me like I was nuts. And then years later, she sent me this scathing email about how could you say you were brave when our sister was dying? Like you are the most egotistical. So I wrote my first book here. This is when they really learned about it. This was my first book. It's just a spiritual evolution. It tells my whole story as an alcoholic. And I would not recommend reading it unless you are an alcoholic, because if you're an alcoholic, you'll be like, I get it. if you're not an alcoholic, you'll be like, this lady is crazy. So anyway, I didn't mean for them to read it. I didn't think they would. They had never cared about my meetings. They had never cared about my recovery. I didn't think they would care about this. So when they read it, my brother was outraged. He thought I was using his son's death for profit, and they are like, you're making all this up. We've never heard of this, right? Because I didn't really come out to myself until I had a dream that came true. I'd also been reading minds by mistake. Sometimes it was embarrassing. Like, a lot of things had been happening, and it was in 2005 that I first had the experience of a dream that becomes real, that has a message that lets me know that that the spirit world is real. And then I heard someone speaking on the radio, a guy named Jeff Long, who studies near-death experiences. That was in 2010. And then I finally went to an IONS meeting, International Association of Near-Death Studies, in 2000. Oh, I'm getting confused now. 2000, the end of 2011 is when I went. And so once I went there, I got the guts to write this book, because there I had community. And here I had thought, oh, I'm so egotistical. Who am I to say that I can read minds or know the future or, all of these things? Once you go to an IONS meeting, you're like, oh, I'm just an ordinary near-death experiencer. Oh, okay, it's no big deal. It's just what happens to people, right? And so once you're not being grandiose, I like to say I'm a garden variety near-death experiencer, the same way I'm a garden variety alcoholic. This is what happens to people. And so they really did not like it, and they wrote 1-star reviews, and it was only out on Kindle in those days. So they'd buy another Kindle, give it another 1-star review, pretending to be someone else. And I got breast cancer at that time. And I will tell you that the storm of hate and emails I got from my family was much more stressful than breast cancer. And on my last day of getting radiation for the breast cancer, I came home and there was another 1-star review, and it was someone who was in AA, and they said that it was just this, what was it? Some kind of twisted monologue of every messed up thing the author ever did. And I just started crying and crying and crying. And then I thought, wait a minute, I know that line. That was in an email my brother sent me. So I went and found the email. There's the same line. So I knew it was him. So I called him and I said, I'm going through breast cancer, and you do this? And first he denied it, and then he said, we didn't know. And then, so it was terrible. And so I just had to take a separation from my family for a while. But time passes. That was 2013. And as my mother got older and older, we really circled the wagons around her. And I was the one who was in Seattle, so I was the one that had to take care of her the most. And I think in my actions, my siblings saw that I was an honorable person. And anyway, now the problem is that I have a brother and a sister, and they are not getting along. And I am trying to bring them together, and one wrote a letter to the other recently, and they are starting to heal a little bit, but it's so awkward because I'm speaking to both of them, they're not speaking to each other, and so that's difficult. Since then, since near-death experiences have come more into the popular culture, and they met other people who've had near-death experiences, now they understand that I'm not lying. It's almost like they had to do the same thing and be like, oh, she's just one of those people who had a near-death experience. So God is us. They are understanding now more and more that the universe is not just matter, it's consciousness. And so if the entire universe is sort of enervated with consciousness and is developing, it intelligence and love, which are actually the same thing, which sounds weird, but in reality, I think they are. And God is just the nexus of all of this intelligence, creativity that is. And we are like nerve endings. We are extensions of that. But it's sort of like every cell in your body has to be able to operate on its own. So it has a hydrophobic sheath around it that allows it to have its own operations inside, but still get information from the neighboring cells. We're kind of similar. If we had too much spiritual awareness, we couldn't stay in our bodies. We'd be like, oh, I'm talking to my dead mother, and here comes the tiger, and you're dead, right? So if we're going to stay in our bodies, we evolved to not hear the chatter, not hear that, like me talking to my dead boyfriend. So if you have a near-death experience, this sheath gets damaged. It just doesn't keep out the spiritual energies as well. And some people are just born with a very thin sheath and they're very sensitive to, without having had a near-death experience. So God is, I feel like my angel is an extension of God, but God is where all the power originates for everything that is. And it's love. It's love. I didn't get past my angel, and no one has ever talked to me except my angel. But I know there's more than just him. And the time when I had the experience with the dream that became real, that then I ended up in tears, and he opened the ceiling above me so I could perceive the universe going in that direction and going in all directions for infinity around me. I could perceive it, and I was bawling, and I said, I will never, never doubt you again. And I meant God. I was talking to God, right? But then I felt someone cracking up, like someone laughing, and it was my angel. And what he said to me then was, yes, little one, we're real and we can do real stuff. And he put it so plainly, because for him it's just such a clear fact, you know. It's like when I asked him what I could call him besides angel, and his response to me was, I've had so many names in so many lifetimes, and none of them are in alphabets that you know. And so then beyond that, once you're on the other side, if everything is telepathy, there is no reason for a name. Because if I want to talk to you, you know I'm talking, you know, I don't, or if I want to talk about someone, like you know, so there's no language, there's no names on the other side. But I do think that we get sent here as, I heard it put very well. There's a very cool podcast where the autistic kids who can't speak have telepathy, and they can make better contact with God than a near-death experiencer while they're conscious. But there's this podcast, it's called The Telepathy Tapes, and it looks at autistic kids who can't speak, but once they become able to type on these machines, they can talk about their telepathic experiences with God. It's a very fascinating podcast. I'd really recommend it. But they were saying that God is almost like the information bank of everything, the history of the universe, and that we are gathering more data. And as we have experiences, we make more data, and we make more love. That's the goal, you know, and it's God growing. One near-death experiencer that I interviewed, she said to God, or to her angel really, what about all the songs I write, you know, and the poems I write, like, did they matter? And she was told, in as much as they help someone else, they matter. And it said, what matters in life is the wake you leave behind you. So like a wake, like a duck leaves on the water, a little ripple. Do people feel better after having known you? Do you uplift people, or do you put them down? That is ultimately what matters. So I just go around being as kind as I can to everybody. I moved to this brand new place, And Amandeep, it's crazy. I have so many friends. I just turned 65. I just had a birthday party here, and I had 15 new friends. I got here in November, and it was just really fun to celebrate with all these new friends because I volunteer in the garden club, and so I mean, it's a garden co-op. It's this big garden, and if you volunteer 3 hours a week, you get produce from it. So I've made a whole bunch of friends there, and then I have all my friends in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then I go take exercise classes. But I also know the guys, just that I see at the store, or see at the post. I try to make a connection with every person I see. When I go to Seattle, it's very frustrating now because people are cold. They don't want to see you. They don't want to connect. But here we're near the ocean and nature is all around us and it's beautiful and everybody's old. And so it's much easier to just cut the bullshit and be like, I'm here, you're here, let's connect. Life is precious. And that's kind of the subtext of everything I do now. To observe my thinking rather than believe it. And there's a little slice of grace between my thoughts and me like buying into them. And it can help me if I meet someone and let's say I judge them for a second. And if I hold back from that, I can be like, you're just judging this person because they look whatever way it is. And I'm like, just try reaching across, make a joke, smile, do something. And then almost invariably the person responds in kind. Or it can be toward myself. I had a bad day on Monday. I started some new prescription and it just made me feel crappy. And I just got really down on myself. In AA, we call it your shitty committee. It's all the voices in your head that say how you suck. And my shitty committee had disbanded, I thought, but they reconvened on Monday and they were saying how I sucked like this and nobody likes me and I can just know it's just like bad weather. I'm having some bad weather right now. It's not real. So I think that we have a guy in my AA meeting, he says, I knew you were judgmental the minute I saw you. So it's a joke, right? Not judging others, to always try to have compassion rather than judgment. And sometimes it takes that little grace to stop myself, because you can't stop your first thought. You can't stop that, right? But you can say, I don't want that thought. I don't choose that thought. I choose to act in a loving way. No question it would be Rumi. I am just astounded by the insight in those poems, and it's just timeless. He tells it like it is for today, and he's 1200 something he was writing. I would love to sit down and have tea with him. It would be, materialism is just a stupid limitation that science is putting on itself, and don't let that limitation keep you from exploring spiritual realities. Anybody, I think, can get some degree of telepathy or can even get in touch to some degree with their ancestors or their loved ones through meditation, through being quiet and raising your vibration by feeling love. I have made contact with my father before who died in 2008, but you have to think of the person and their love. So I would say it's not just there's a God of religion or there's nothing. There's spiritual entities all around us, spiritual energies. And it enriches life so much if you can know that what you do matters. If you are mean to somebody, it matters. And so many times I'll ask him about, why is this happening? Why this? Why that? You know what he says? He says, little one, be human. Love being human. Because there are things that we don't get to know now, but as soon as we're out of our bodies, we'll know. But he can't feel emotions the way humans feel them. Our whole like soupy limbic system of like love, but sorrow, but missing someone, but all of these like dimensions of emotion are things that embodied beings have. I think animals have them too. And to enjoy that, not be in a hurry to see the answer card, and enjoy the journey.